Good evening, and thank you for joining me for another Boring Books for Bedtime. I hope tonight's selection provides all the boredom your busy brain needs to quiet down and let you get some sleep. So find a comfortable spot, adjust your volume, take a nice deep breath in, let it out slowly, and off we go. Before we begin tonight's reading, I'd like to make a few announcements that I've rather foolishly been putting at the end of the podcast, when hopefully you're no longer awake. First, I'd like to give a special shout out of thanks to Tara, the latest member of our Patreon family. Tara, thank you so much for your support of this podcast. It helps make it possible, and it's much appreciated. Second, in addition to the Patreon, where subscribers can get exclusive episodes found nowhere else, I've initiated a few new ways to support this podcast that don't require a subscription. The first is through buymeacoffee.com, and the second through merchandise purchases at teespring.com, which currently has logo merchandise and will be updated with new designs in the coming months. You'll find direct links to all support options in the show description or on our website at www.boringbookspod.com. Finally, if you're ever interested in reading one of these works for yourself, you'll always find a link to a free ebook version from Project Gutenberg in the show description. Now, let's get to the reading. This evening, we're reading something a little less philosophical than some of our more recent works, but no less boring. Bad Drains and How to Test Them, with notes on the ventilation of sewers, drains, and sanitary fittings, and the origin and transmission of zymotic disease, by R. Harris Reeves. Published by E. and F. N. Spahn, London and New York, 1885. Let's begin. Introduction. The impetus given to improvements in sanitary matters by the conferences held during last year at the Health Exhibition, as well as the desire shown by engineers and others to improve the sanitary condition of towns, has induced me to publish the following system of detecting defects in drainage and sanitary fittings. It must be admitted that grave errors have been committed by engineers, architects, and builders, both in planning the fittings of houses and in laying drains to the main sewers during the last 20 years. These errors have been found to have produced serious effects on the public health. They have also been the means of establishing throughout the country a number of sanitary protection societies. These institutions have been the means of saving many useful lives, but I trust that the day is not far distant when these societies will cease to exist, and such terms as scientific plumbers and sanitary arrangements carried out on the most scientific principles will be a thing of the past. To my mind, it is a national disgrace to know that in this 19th century, architects and builders fixed fittings to houses and laid drains from houses to sewers, which affected the health of the occupants to such an extent that it was necessary to establish insurance offices to protect persons from being killed by workmen or their employers. What a page for future historians. The work or purpose of drains and sanitary fittings is to carry off by water the soil and dirt from our houses, and it is lamentable to think that this cannot be done without injury to life. What should we say if the same precautions were necessary to test or examine the work of other professions or trades? To many, the system described in these pages may appear new, but it is by no means so, as it was discovered and used by me in 1880, and was then the means of finding out serious defects in a supposed perfect drainage system. From that time up to the present, it has proved of considerable value in determining any defect in the construction of drains and fittings. With the detector and anemometer, I have been enabled to discover the cause of so many failures in sewer ventilation and to trace the origin and transmission of many cases of zymotic disease. The object of this work is to place the same knowledge in the hands of every person connected with sanitary work. May 1885. Bad drains and how to test them. Bad drains. How often has this term been used during the last few years? By the medical profession alone, thousands of cases have been attributed to this cause. To the honor and credit of that profession, its members have thought out and worked out the cause of innumerable cases of disease under their charge, and rightly fixed their origin to be due to bad drains. In many cases, it has been but a fashionable term to describe cases which had the appearance of gas poisoning, but did not owe their origin to drains, but rather to the heated and impure atmosphere of rooms, late hours, and the sudden change from heat to cold. If there have been a few hundred cases where bad drains were supposed to have caused the illness, and such was not the case, there have been thousands of others where the disease originated from them, but was taken as a matter of course, or as one of the frailties of the human frame, when undoubtedly the cause was bad drains. It is a most remarkable thing that whilst on the one hand we have the medical profession energetically working to find out defects in the planning of drains and sanitary fittings, we have on the other hand surveyors and others who have treated the matter as a doctor's fad. During the last 5 years, scarcely a medical conference has been held without the question of bad drains forming one of the principal subjects discussed. Medical officers of health have made stirring speeches and reports to local boards. But where is the surveyor who has had the energy to do the same, unless it has been actually forced upon him? It is a curious but noteworthy fact that nearly the whole of the evils of badly constructed drains and the principal improvements in them have been forced on surveyors, builders, and plumbers by the medical profession and the public. The reticence shown by surveyors in dealing with bad drains may be attributed to their unwillingness to acknowledge the errors and defects in works already executed. These works were, at the time, executed according to the theories adopted by the most eminent engineers in the profession, and it would be considered unprofessional to admit errors. There is scarcely a district, excepting where drains have been laid within the last 3 years, where the branch drains are trapped into the main sewers with an efficient water seal. Surveyors feel that to acknowledge this would be tantamount to acknowledging a want of professional knowledge or neglect of duty on their part. Now, strictly speaking, this could not be the case, and a surveyor placed in such a position where he knows that there are defects in his drainage system, and probably these errors were made by himself, could say that these now known defects were not previously known by the most eminent engineers, and especially with regard to sewer gas, its treatment and action on the public health. Boldly facing the matter and advocating that the drainage under his charge should be so perfected that no medical man could point to it as being detrimental to health, coming from the surveyor, he would carry the board with him, and in doing so would make his position at the board doubly secure. To prove this, we have only to refer to reports made by engineers during the last 15 years on drainage schemes. Compare the results of the theories laid down, and note the instances in which they have failed, especially those in connection with sewage farms and the ventilation of sewers. I will quote a few extracts from these reports. Quote, "No injury to health can possibly take place from gas issuing from properly constructed gratings fixed in the middle of the road. And if one is a nuisance, dig down and put in others until the nuisance is removed." End quote. This has certainly not been the case. You may dig as many holes as you like and put in as many gratings, yet some will be injurious to health. In describing sewage farms, they were described as being, if adopted, the means of securing a large revenue to the local board by the excellent crops grown. One engineer stating that persons could walk through them with as much pleasure as through a flower or kitchen garden. But practical experience has proved this to be incorrect, and although these statements were made in good faith, they have not been realized. You may regulate the irrigation of a sewage farm to such a nicety that no odor from the sewage is perceptible in the district, yet the atmosphere will contain poisons which will have a very detrimental effect on the health of those living there. For a few years after sewage farms have been laid out, they pay, and you get good crops from them. But after that, the ground becomes so soured that the farm is almost useless. In face of these facts, no surveyor should hesitate to bring forward known improvements to his board. Many owners of property have recognized the importance of adopting the best sanitary measures for their houses, although in some cases it is only a plea to let or sell their property. As an instance of this, some time ago I was in search of a house in the suburbs, and met with one describing as standing on good gravelly soil, with good drainage and perfect sanitary arrangements. The builder and owner took me over the house, and on reaching the kitchen, pointed out with some degree of pride that the sink was cut off from the drains, and stated that the drains were constructed on the most scientific principles. Now, although scientific plumbers have done good work in making our dwellings more healthy, they have in many cases overdone the matter. The fact of their displaying conspicuously on signs and billboards sanitary work executed on the most scientific principles is not always a guarantee that a healthy house can be received from their hands. In the house above referred to, everything to the eye appeared sound and good, but on the house being occupied, a disagreeable odor was noticed in the kitchen and in some of the lower rooms. The sink pipe, which was pointed out by the builder as being cut off, ran from the sink trough without a trap or water seal of any kind, and through this pipe, when the doors were shut, the air was supplied to the building at the rate of 180 feet per minute. The back of the WC was ventilated from the outside to give free ventilation to the space under the seat, and through the ventilators, which were working as inlets, the air came into the house, which supplied the bedrooms, passing over the pan between it and the seat. The above is an illustration of a house where sanitary arrangements were supposed to be on the most scientific principles. Fresh air being supplied to bedrooms by passing over the closet pan, and in the kitchen and rooms below by passing through a 2-inch sink pipe. This is one of the many cases that may be mentioned to show the necessity of testing any system of drainage and sanitary fittings. This is not an unusual occurrence, as thousands of similar cases exist, where the principal air supply passes over sanitary fittings or through apertures which bring it in contact more or less with decomposed matter. In a building where a number of fireplaces exist, a constant current of air is passing in from the outside, which, after mixing with the air in the building, escapes up the chimney. An ordinary chimney extracts from the room from 60 to 120 cubic feet of air per minute. Thus, in a 10-roomed house, you have going out of the chimneys at least 1,000 cubic feet of air per minute. When the house is closed, this large volume of air is drawn into it through apertures offering the least resistance, whether it be ventilators in the WC, kitchen sinks, or drains in the basement, which traps may have been siphoned, over sanitary pipes, or through doors and windows. Whichever point offers the least resistance, there the supply to feed the chimneys will come. The injurious effects on the health of persons who occupy buildings that take in their air supply through unclean apertures are too well known to those medical men and others who have had experience in sanitary matters, and it can be only estimated by results. I could enumerate cases where the health of the inmates and the death rate were conclusive evidence to prove the disastrous effects produced by air being supplied through such inlets. One case in particular consisted of 8 blocks of buildings planned exactly alike. The drains were cut off on the outside at the foot of all soil pipes, and a second disconnection about 50 feet from the building. In one building, the basement was drained into the branch drain with a trap in the inside, and from the quantity of water and soil which flowed through this branch drain, the basement trap was constantly being siphoned, leaving a 6-inch air supply into the building through 50 feet of drain. This, combined with 200 feet per minute through the WC, had the effect of causing an unusual depression of spirits in the occupants of this building, and more deaths occurred in this one block than in the whole of the others. It does not require a large amount of scientific knowledge to ensure a healthy building. What is required is sound pipes, the area of them in proportion to the work they have to do, tight joints, and a knowledge of ventilation. Nothing must be left to theory. A pipe either leaks or lets out the soil, or it is sound. If it is sound, sewage matter can be carried through it anywhere without the slightest injury to health or unpleasantness of any kind. Pipes can be ventilated without traps being siphoned, and the gases from sewers and soil pipes treated so as to ensure healthy buildings at a moderate cost. As a rule, the first intimation of any defect in the drainage system of a town or the sanitary fittings of a building is given by the medical officer of health or the medical attendant of the family, whose attention has been forcibly drawn to it by the serious illness of the inmates. It is no unusual occurrence that after the medical officer, surveyor, and inspector of nuisances have made a minute inspection of a building, they leave it without discovering defects which exist in pipes carefully cased over, or in the sanitary fittings. To detect the manner in which poisons from drains are thrown into a building and inhaled by the occupants is oftentimes not an easy matter. In many cases, the drains have been so cut about and additions made to them that to trace defects or even the number of drains which are attached to the branch drainer sewers, a considerable amount of excavating is necessary. The system described in these pages is intended to prevent in a measure this excavating, and to enable a person above the ground to determine the number, capacity, and state of the drains underneath the surface, as well as to more readily discover any imperfections in soil pipes and sanitary fittings. When sewers are laid to a town or district, it is the practice of the authorities to let the work by tender, the lowest tender being oftentimes accepted. Consequently, it is in the interest of the contractor to get the work done as quickly and cheaply as possible. It is impossible for the engineer or clerk of works to see the whole of the work done, and the result is that a large quantity of bricks which form the sewer are not properly bedded. Liquid sewage finds its way through the joints of the brickwork and percolates through the soil, in some cases to a very considerable distance, contaminating the water it mixes with on its course, and oftentimes it forms a putrid mass under the basement of buildings which happen to be of a lower level than the sewers. To prevent this, a clause should be inserted in the contract that each length of drain or sewer should be tested by atmospheric pressure, say 5 pounds to a square inch. The top of the sewer should be as tight as the bottom to prevent any gas escaping through the sandy soil or rubble which may be filled in around the sewers or drains. leaky sewers and badly jointed pipes under the soil should never be allowed. Yet the danger is not so great in them as in those pipes laid above the ground. Joints to these pipes so often leak that without testing them thoroughly when laid, one leaky joint would cause an unpleasant odor in a building for years without its source being discovered. The reason of this is that the current of air passes through buildings in 1,000 different ways. I have known a sickly odor to come from a cupboard on the first floor of the wing of a building some 60 feet from any soil pipe or grating. One case in particular, that of a nursery cupboard. This occurred through a leaky soil pipe from the closet in the basement of the building. From the planning of the building, the chimney near the cupboard had the greatest draft of air in the house, and the air which supplied this chimney came principally from the basement. The sewer gas from the leaky joint, being of a heavier gravity than the atmosphere of the house, was carried along the floor unobserved to this particular room, filling at night, when the fire was not burning, this cupboard, which contained linen, and this held the impurities given off from the leaky joint of the pipe. Many cases of a similar nature could be mentioned, where families will never recover the loss sustained by them through similar leaky joints in the soil pipes. Insufficient fall to sewers does not often occur in those laid under the supervision of engineers, but it is in the branch drains connected to them where so many blunders are made. Oftentimes, one part of a drain is laid almost level, whilst another part is laid with a steep gradient. This facilitates the choking of drains and the siphoning of traps. Some persons lay drains from houses to the main sewer or to branch drains which are altogether out of proportion to the work they have to do. The smaller the drain is kept, the better, but the diameter should be regulated according to the quantity of water and soil flowing into it, taking into consideration the possibility of additional inlets being added. The best plan is to collect the number of inlets or supplies to the drain, compare them with the gradient to which they are laid, and put in a drain which, if all the inlets are supplying water at the same time, would not fill more than 9/10 of its area. In some cases, I have seen a 9-inch drain laid from a house having only 2 closets, sink and bath outlet attached. If the whole of these were used at the same time, the area of the flow into the drain would only be 7.696 inches, but in the 9-inch drain, the area would be 63.617 inches, or nearly 9 times the size required to carry off the water and soil. The whole space not occupied by water and soil is filled with gas, which extracts poisons from sewage and distributes them at outlets according to the displacement caused by the water and soil entering and flowing through the drain. Architects and builders laying drains to houses or buildings should discard the theories of any persons who do not keep to this rule, that the smaller the drain is, the better, providing it does not fill, and the least quantity of gas there is in the drain, the less dangerous will be the poison in the gas when discharged through openings or gratings. The reason of this is that in a small drain, only a small quantity of the sewage is exposed to the action of the gas in transit, whereas in a large drain, the greater portion of the sewage is exposed, thus increasing its decomposition. When stormwater from houses or land enters drains, great care should be taken to form openings or inlets near where drains are likely to fill, as the injurious effects of trap siphoning are of serious consequence to health. In many cases, the construction of new drains and sewers in a district have been simply a waste of money as regards improving the health of the inhabitants, and numerous cases of zymotic disease, and in some cases an epidemic, has occurred where previously such diseases were almost unknown. This is caused principally by connecting old drains, some of which are disused ones and connected with old cesspits, to the new drains leading to the sewers. In cesspits and old drains, the soil and putrid matter have been for years allowed to accumulate, and the poison from such matter, when distributed into the open air through gratings in the new sewers or into houses, is, when inhaled into the system, the cause of these zymotic outbreaks. In tracing these old drains, and in preventing stagnant gases from remaining in any portion of the drain, the engineer or architect cannot pay too much attention, as confined gases, when charged with poisons from putrid matter, are the principal factors in producing disease. Many persons place a well-constructed trap at the inlet, and another some distance along the drain, say at the end of a building or grounds, without any ventilation between the two traps. In fact, this used to be a common occurrence, but it should never be done. If the drain should be a 6-inch one, and the traps 50 feet apart, the amount of gas between the two traps would average 9 cubic feet, and this gas would, in the ordinary working of the drain, remain for years, getting more poisonous the longer it remained undisturbed. The owner of the house, knowing that he had a good trapped drain connected to sewers, would feel himself safe and naturally think his house healthy. Far better for him if the house were drained into a ventilated cesspit, as when the gases in the drain become released, which may occur by the siphoning of the traps at the house connection, the danger would be equal to the emptying of a disused cesspit and carrying the contents through the house. The more a person tests the working of gas in sewers or drains, the more he will find that branch drains from their construction supply the poisons which render the gases in the sewers themselves so noxious. In 1880, whilst engaging in tracing the course of an outbreak of typhoid, I made a series of experiments with a view to trace the source from which the disease emanated, and every experiment proved that the origin of the disease lay in the gases which were in contact with putrid sewage matter, existing in old drains and cesspits attached to the sewers, as well as in the gases which were confined between traps. The distribution of the disease was due to the imperfect construction of the sewers drains, and sanitary fittings. The most successful experiment, and the one from which the greatest result was obtained, and which I have ever since most successfully used, was in determining the state, size, and condition of the drains underground, and also that of the house or buildings, by measuring by compression the gas contained in the sewer or sanitary fittings. The principal cause of its distribution was the compression of the gas between the water traps, the siphoning of house traps, leaving at times a free passage for the gas to enter the house. The amount of compression or displacement necessary to force the gas in bulk through the traps has been accurately measured. To know what quantity of liquid was required to be thrown into a drain or sewer of any size to force the gas in bulk through the water trap. The lifting power of the gas on the water by compression was found to be 1/300th part of its bulk. Thus, if a drain perfectly sound and sealed with a water seal each end held 300 feet of gas, 1 cubic foot of water thrown into the drain would force the gas in bulk through the water seal. It became evident that if both ends of any drain were sealed with a water trap or otherwise for testing, the capacity of the drain or leaks of any kind could be determined without excavating. As it was inconvenient to watch the working of the drain through the traps, I constructed an instrument called a detector to observe the working of the atmosphere in the drain. This instrument, with instructions as to reagents, can be obtained from E. Setti, Meteorological Instrument Maker, 36 Brook Street, Holborn. Price 12 shillings 8 pence. It is cheaper and more convenient than the pressure gauge, and registers any pressure during the testing of drains. This instrument, or a gas pressure gauge, when attached to the drain, will denote by the rising of the liquid the amount of compression in the drain. This, when compared with the quantity of water thrown into it, will give the size and capacity of the drain, and will also indicate any siphoning of traps or leaks which exist in any of the sanitary fittings of the house. The following table will show the amount of gas in every 100 feet of circular pipe or drain from 4 to 30 inches in diameter. Also, the amount of water thrown into a trap to produce the necessary pressure of gas to lift the liquid 1 inch in the detector or pressure gauge. The quantity being, as near as possible, 3 1/3 ounces of water to 1 cubic foot of gas space. The method of testing drains and fittings by compression of gas is as follows. When the drainage plan of the building exists, the work of testing by compression of gas in the drain will be a very simple matter. Plate 1 shows the drains as laid to a semi-detached villa with 2 inlets from sinks marked 1, 1 from bath overflow marked 2, and 2 from the soil pipes of closets in the basement and first floor marked 3. The drain from A to B is a 6-inch stoneware pipe, and its length is 100 feet. The amount of gas in it would be 19 and 1,096 1,728ths of cubic feet. The branch drain from the other inlets are 4 inches in diameter, and the collected lengths are 50 feet, and the quantity of gas in them would be 4 and 627 1,728ths cubic feet, giving a total in the whole of the drain of nearly 24 cubic feet. If the India rubber pipe to the detector or pressure gauge is placed in either of the traps marked 1, and the glass tube filled with liquid up to the data line, 5 pints of water poured into either of the traps marked 1 will produce a rise of 1 inch in the liquid of the detector. That is, if all the drains are clear and joints tight, the drains being stopped off for testing at A. Should a trap be fixed anywhere between A and B, a lesser quantity will be required to lift the liquid, and the position of the trap can be determined by comparing the exact quantity of water used with the capacity or quantity of gas in the drain. If a trap should be fixed or a stoppage formed in any part of the drain A, B, the flushing of a closet or sink would, by the compression of the gas, force it in bulk through the weakest trap, or the one having the least dip or seal. The quantity which would pass through would depend on the amount of water used in the flushing and the fall of the drain. The drains to the building having been tested and their defects ascertained, it will be necessary now to test the soil pipe. On this plan, it is fixed on the outside of the house, having a trap with an open grating just beyond the basement closet, and a ventilating pipe carried above the eaves of the roof. Whether the soil pipe be fixed inside or outside of the building, it should be perfectly gas tight, and in this testing a person cannot be too particular. In testing the soil pipe shown on plan, the easiest method is to put the detector or pressure gauge at the grating of the trap 3, placing the India rubber tube over the grating and making a tight joint with clay. Then close the top of the ventilating pipe and pour water in the top closet. When, if the joints are tight, the liquid in the detector will rise suddenly and then lower itself as the water leaves the trap, indicating that the soil pipe is tight. But if it is not tight, no rising of the liquid will take place. Should there be no trap at the bottom of the soil pipe, it will be necessary to excavate down to the drain to take out a length of pipe, to seal the mouth of the drain with clay for testing. If there should be leaky joints or holes in the soil pipe, a little sulfur burnt in the pipe or a little pungent essence thrown into it will clearly denote where the leaks are. Having tested the soil pipe and proved it tight, or effectually stopped all leaks as the case may be, no gas can be given off in these drains or fittings except through the ventilators under ordinary circumstances, as no trap has been siphoned in the testing. As before stated, the ventilating pipe runs to the top of the building in the same diameter as the soil pipe. In fact, this is a plan of drains to a house recently built in the suburbs of London, and the planning of them would be considered perfect by many sanitary men. But before we testify them as perfect, let us carefully analyze the working of the ventilation. The ventilating pipe being carried above the roof is strictly in accordance with the bylaws of the local board, although it spoils the appearance of the house. One reason why it was put there is to prevent the siphoning of the closet trap, and its height is to carry out the recommendations of medical writers in the Lancet, who have so often insisted that these tall pipes, carried some feet away from chimneys or bedroom windows, were necessary. Let us test this theory. We will flush the closet by throwing down slops and giving the closet the regular flush, carefully testing what takes place. The result is that the soil pipe, instead of carrying off the odors from the top, only forms an air inlet, and 2 1/4 cubic feet of air has been sucked in at the top of the pipe, and the same quantity of gas discharged through the grating. As this grating on the plan is only 2 feet from the passage door which leads into the kitchen, the least that occurs is that a portion enters the house, and the cook has a slight headache when preparing the meals for the day. To be more certain of this, let us test the working of the ventilation by a dozen flushings of the closets, and the same results are obtained by measurement. 27 cubic feet of air entered the top of the pipe and has been driven out at the grating below. This proves that it is unnecessary to spoil the appearance of our houses by the erection of these pipes, or of carrying them above the soil pipe or closet level. It would not be consistent for me here to state how these unsightly pipes could be avoided, but I am confident that ere long they will become obsolete, although they have been erected by thousands in various parts of the country. We will now test the working of the ventilation in drains A, B, and those in branch drains to traps marked I. As they are clear, we find that the gases in them are not so poisonous as in the sewers to which they are connected. A manhole grating exists in the sewer some 40 yards from the back of the building, and through this grating the gas which is driven by the flushing escapes, and its density depends on the nature of the soil passing in the sewer. Its density is lessened by diffusion, or the mixing of the gas which takes place at the grating, but the time it takes for the gas which is in the drain near the trap's eye to mix with the fresh air at the grating in the street is a problem that I will leave others to solve. We are certain that no gas in bulk can pass through the trap under ordinary circumstances. We can now certify that the drains are tight, well-trapped, and ventilated. They are laid strictly in accordance with the bylaws of the local board, and we can quote that similar plans were exhibited last year at the Health Exhibition as models for country architects and builders to copy, and 99 out of every 100 sanitary inspectors would sign the certificate that the sanitary arrangements were carefully tested and found perfect. Experience in working the detector will not allow me to do this, although for months not the slightest particle of sewer gas has entered the building, until one evening about 8 o'clock a sickly smell is observed in the kitchen, and this is attributed to a change in the weather, heavy rain having fallen during the day, and no notice was taken of it before retiring to rest. In the morning, the house is unbearable. The inspector of nuisances is sent for, who cannot detect anything wrong in the drains. The surveyor to the local board visits the house with the same result, and it is not until the middle of the day before the nuisance has abated, its cause still a mystery to the sanitary officials and to the owner of the house, who is a medical man of great experience in sanitary matters and a sanitary writer. Now, what really did occur was this. The sewer at the back nearly filled with water and soil caused by the heavy rains, and when this was rising, about 2 cubic feet of gas was forced from the drain B through the grating at the bottom of the soil pipe. The junction where the drain at A joined the sewer was made as usual about 2/3 the height of the sewer. Consequently, the drain from A to B filled some 20 feet during the storm. When the storm abated, the water leaving the drain at A sucked the trap at the bottom of the soil pipe 3. The seal being gone, the gas from the sewer at once came through the trap, the current being estimated at from 80 to 200 feet per minute, so that the quantity of gas given off at the trap, which is 2 feet from the door, would be about 2,000 cubic feet from the time the trap was sucked until it was filled again by the flushing of the closet. This is by no means an exceptional occurrence. 2 similar cases occurred in the suburbs last year. In one case, the owner of the house was seriously ill for several days, and was, for some weeks, obliged to neglect his business and seek a change of air. In the other case, the daughter was taken ill with a zymotic disease which nearly cost her her life, and it was months before she regained her strength. The easiest method of preventing this siphoning of the traps is to fix a small mica valve at the most convenient part of the drain between A and B, fixing it above the ground. You can also prevent it as well as the gas coming near the house by putting in a trap at A and having an open grating between A and B. This would not prevent the 2,000 cubic feet of gas before referred to from escaping from the drains, but would cause it to be discharged some distance from the house. You would also have about 23 cubic feet of gas in the drain, always mixing with the atmosphere of the garden at this point when the traps are full and tight. Plate 2 shows the plan and drains of a hospital which I tested by this system in 1880. As it was an old building, the testing was somewhat different to that described in Plate 1. In describing the method of testing drains, nothing has been mentioned as to the level to which branch drains to houses should be laid, or the method of testing them to ascertain their fall. The fall given to branch drains should not be less than 1 in 100, but 1 in 80 is far preferable, and if the drains are laid to this level, water will flow easily through them. But should any part be laid out of a level, the water would lay in them and thus give a less quantity of gas. Then, when tested by compression to the capacity of the drain, the lesser quantity would denote the nature of the dip. When a plan of drains exists, as in the two cases shown in the plates, the difficulty of testing them and proving their defects will not be as great as when no plan has been made. If no plan has been made or no record kept of them, it is best to make a rough plan of the building, fixing the positions of all inlets, their sizes and lengths of branches to the drains on the premises, and also to lay down on the plan the length and size of this drain to where it reaches the extent of the property or joins the main sewer, opening the ground for testing in a similar manner to that described in Plate 1. In testing pipes or sanitary fittings of any kind, leaks can be easily found by attaching the detector or pressure gauge to the most convenient part of the pipe or fitting, and when everything is sound, care should be taken to flush all inlets at the same time to ascertain whether the rush of water has any effect on the traps or water seal. If the vibration in the detector or pressure gauge exceeds 0.2 of an inch, a freer gas space must be provided, or the action of the water checked in some manner. Pipes, whether sanitary or otherwise, can be tested as to tightness in a similar manner. Some modification may be necessary in testing large sewers or the drains of a district, but if the testing is performed in a similar manner to that adopted in the above case, the condition of the drains and fittings can be accurately ascertained. The least pressure or suction on the traps of drains or fittings will be shown by the vibration of the liquid in the detector or pressure gauge when the water passes through the pipes with flushing. The term bad drains is not exclusively confined to those drains that have leaky joints or have an insufficient fall, or traps which siphon during the passage of the water, but may also be applied to systems of sewers in general. There are 2 points in almost every system of drainage that call for some improvement. The first is having the inlets at junctions where small drains join sewers at the side of the sewers. Thousands of traps are being continually siphoned by this cause as soon as the water fills the sewer above the inlet of the branch drain, as this, when filled with water only a short distance, forces gas through the weakest trap, and on the water and soil lowering itself in the sewer, this water acts exactly as the plunger of a pump and draws the water out of the weakest trap. This is often the one in the area or basement of the building, and to avoid this, all inlets at junctions should enter the top of the sewers, not for the soil to drop down so as to cause the sewers to silt, but in an oblique direction with the sewage flow. The second point is in the ventilation of sewers, which is not an easy subject to handle. And with that, we've reached the end of this riveting first chapter of bad drains and how to test them. That was a very thorough explanation of 19th century drain testing. I have no idea if it actually worked, but it certainly sounded scientific. Hopefully, you're no longer awake to hear this, but if you are and you'd like to read this work for yourself, You'll find a link to a free ebook version from Project Gutenberg in the show description. The description also contains links to our website and various ways you can help support this podcast. If you'd like to connect, you can do so on our website, www.boringbookspod.com, or find me on Twitter at boringbookspod. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much for joining me this evening. Until our next boring book, good